Hello there, watching L24 Midnight News. I'm your host Abdulrahim Kashur, and these are today's top stories. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres hailed the role of Algerian diplomacy in supporting stability and its real contribution to achieving the sustainable development goals in the continent. Despite US sanctions, fighting worsens in Sudan as shelling rocked the capital Al-Khartoum between Sudan's warring generals. Once the war is over, NATO leaders are discussing ways to ensure that Ukraine does not come under attack once again. And in sport, playing the Young Africans Club of Tanzania for the African Confederation Cup, the Algerian club Uzma Algiers is one game away from achieving the first continental title in its history. Hello again and welcome. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, held as part of his working visit to New York a working session with the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, during which they discussed several issues, including Algeria's bid for non-permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council for the period between 2024 and 2025. Mohammed Khatou.
Entrusted by the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, Algeria's diplomacy chief conveyed to the Secretary General the sincere greetings of the President of the Republic and his best wishes, reiterating his full support for his efforts and endeavors aimed at putting an end to crises and establishing security and stability. For his part, Mr. Antonio Guterres expressed his pride at the talks he had with the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune.
I am proud of the meetings I had with the President of the Republic and the concern I perceived in him regarding the strengthening of the role of the United Nations and the multilateral action in the face of the challenges besetting the international community at the global level.
During this meeting, cooperation relations between Algeria and the UN and means and ways of strengthening them were examined, particularly ahead of Algeria's accession to the Security Council during the period from 2024 to 2025. The UN Secretary General also hailed the role of Algerian diplomacy in supporting stability and its real contributions to achieving sustainable development goals in the continent.
I highly praise the role of Algerian diplomacy in supporting the stability of Libya and Mali and its real contributions to advancing the sustainable development goals in the region and across the continent.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the national community abroad also seized the opportunity to inform the Secretary General about the results of the Algerian presidency of the 31st session of the Council of the Arab League at the summit level.
Always with the Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf, who was in talks with the Director of United Nations Development Programme, Akim Steiner, at United Nations headquarters in New York. They also exchanged ideas about ways and possibilities of cooperation between the two parties in supporting economic development projects in neighboring countries, especially in African coast. Attaf extended an invitation to Steiner to visit Algeria in order to continue their talks and explore new areas of cooperation. The Syrian Foreign Minister Faisal al-Muqdad pointed out that national role played by Algeria to promote Arab reunification and the efforts that is culminated in the return of his country to the League of Arab States. This came during the granting of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, the Algerian ambassador to Damascus, Lahsan Touhami, the Syrian Order of Merit of the Excellent Class in recognition of his efforts in developing Syrian-Algerian relations at a farewell ceremony on the occasion of the end of his duties as ambassador of Algeria to Syria. The Secretary General of United Nations, Antonio Guterres, said on Friday that the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees is on the verge of financial collapse. calling on donor countries to urgently fund the organization. This came in his speech during a meeting of the General Assembly Committee dedicated to pledging to UN Relief Work Agency held at United Nations headquarters in New York, with the aim of increasing country support for the agency, which was delivered on his behalf by Director of the United Nations Office, Earl Courtney Rattray.
UNRWA is on the verge of financial collapse. The consequences of further budget cuts would be nothing short of catastrophic. When UNRWA's future hangs in the balance, so do the lives of millions of Palestinian refugees relying on essential services.
In a different matter now to the occupied Palestine, where a Palestinian child was hit and injured by a gas canister on Friday fired by the occupation forces. The incident happened at peaceful protests, which are part of the weekly anti-colonization demonstration in the village of Beit Dijan, east of Nablus. According to medical sources, many others suffocated from tear gas in the same village. The Zionist right-wing government led by Benjamin Netanyahu is accelerating the building of thousands of settlements and Judaization of Palestinian Islamic monumentums to demolish the Palestinian civilization character, cut off geographical communication between different cities and neighborhoods, and draw a false reality that serves the occupation plans. This crime, the crime of settlement and land seizure, is accompanied by forced displacement and continuous incursions into towns and camps to force Palestinians to evacuate their homes and lands. In Asia, to the tragedy that's happened in India, where at least 207 people have been killed after 3 trains were involved in a crash in the east of the country. Hundreds of others were injured when a passenger train derailed and collided with another passenger service that then hit a goods train in Odisha, Balasore district. In the African continent, tensions soar in Sudan as clashes and artillery offensives persist in the capital Khartoum and Omdurman following the collapse of peace deal between the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese army. Hussein Barkan.
Efforts to find a resolution to the Sudanese crisis face mounting challenges as the situation grows increasingly complex. Khartoum vibrated with explosions on Friday, accompanied by artillery shelling targeting the Omdurman region as the truce fell apart. The Sudanese army responded by deploying military reinforcement to the capital after suspending its participation in negotiations, accusing the Rapid Support Forces of violating the Jeddah agreement mediated by Saudi Arabia.
We agreed to more than one armistice despite the rebels' non-compliance with its requirements and their non-implementation of any of the points that were signed in the Jeddah agreement, which prompted us to take a decision to suspend negotiations, and our delegation remained in Jeddah in the hope that mediation would take a fair and more effective approach that would ensure adherence to what was agreed upon.
Images have come to dominate the Sudanese landscape since the outbreak of violence in April. The Rapid Support Forces have been sharing videos on their platforms, declaring their readiness to repel any forthcoming attacks. Amidst this dire situation, the Sudanese people continue to suffer, according to the latest figures from the Medical Syndicate. The civilian death toll has surpassed 860, with over 3,600 wounded. More than 1.2 million people have been internally displaced, while over 500,000 sought refuge abroad, according to the United Nations statistics. There are no indications that the military confrontations will abate soon, raising concerns about the escalation into full-blown civil war. The fragility of the truce, the prevalence of violence in Sudan, and the party's commitment to military action in pursuit of what they perceive as a victory all contribute to the growing uncertainty and instability in the region.
The head of the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, Abdullah Batili, and the head of the Libyan Presidential Council, Mohammed Al-Manfi, discussed the work of the 6+6 committee, where they expressed their common hope in drafting enforceable electoral laws in preparation for the expected elections this year, a meeting that falls within the series of UN consultations with Libyan parties to advance the electoral process. In Africa still, Tunisian President Kais Saied affirmed his country's adherence to its sovereignty and to the constant of its foreign policy, the most important of its refusal to interfere in its internal affairs. This came during his meeting at the Carthage Palace with the Foreign Minister Nabil Ammar. The meeting dealt with the results of the various meetings held by Ammar on the occasion of his recent visit to Paris. President Saied reaffirmed that his country has a history that is much richer than many other countries in the field of rights and freedoms. The Moroccan Exchange Bureau revealed a significant widening of country's trade deficit, which exceeded $9 billion in the first quarter of this year. The office also revealed an increase in the value of the country's imports that reached almost $24 billion and a sharp decline in the value of export. In their meeting in South African administrative capital Pretoria, BRICS foreign ministers asserted that bloc's ambition to rival Western powers. The ministers also discussed plans to potentially admit new members to the club. Nabil Khazini.
The BRICS wants to have a stronger voice on the international scene. The last meeting was the one to announce that the group's arms are wide open to welcome other nations. The aim is to rebalance the global order. To date, 19 states have expressed interest in joining the BRICS, whose membership is today limited to only 5 countries.
I believe the enlargement of the BRICS will be beneficial to the BRICS countries, beneficial to developing countries, and to increase the representation influence of this mechanism, and also to garner bigger power of the BRICS to serve the interests of developing countries and emerging market economies, as well as the international development cause.
The BRICS activity cannot be separated from attempts to challenge Western hegemony and precisely the US dominance of the global financial system. This is what the group is trying to do by creating another means of making commercial payments using a single alternative currency to the US dollar.
Spoke about and supported the notion of really looking at how we can transform international development finance institutions and have a more representative voice for the developing world.
In its second decade, the BRICS emerged as one of the world's most powerful blocs. Its enlargement is proving to be as a locomotive for global growth. But the rise of the BRICS is also an important geopolitical change, as the group has become an alternative to the liberal international order led by the United States.
Raid alerts were lifted by Ukrainian authorities across most of the country, and officials in the capital Kiev said defense appeared to have shot down more than 30 missiles and drones fired by Russia. Russia has launched about 20 missiles and drone attacks on Kiev since the beginning of May, the same source stated. Meanwhile, the governor of the Russian Bryansk region pointed out in a series of posts on the Telegram on Friday that 2 villages close to the Ukrainian border were bombed by Kiev forces without any injuries. The Russian President Vladimir Putin told in a meeting of the Russian Security Council on Friday that he would call ill-wishers were gradually trying to destabilize his country. President Putin added that this must not be allowed no matter what the circumstances are. The meeting on Friday was dedicated to issues of inter-ethnic relations.
Вы знаете, что совсем недавно в рамках соответствия...
Quite recently, within the framework of the corresponding council under the president, my colleagues and I dealt with issues of interethnic relations in the country. For the Russian Federation, these issues are extremely important, bearing in mind that we have 190 ethnic groups living in the country. Today, we will deal with the same issues in relation for ensuring the security of Russia. In this case, to ensure domestic political security, taking into account the efforts that our ill-wishers are still making and intensifying in order to stir up the situation inside the Russian Federation. And you and I must do everything in order not to let them do this under any circumstances.
Ни при каких обстоятельствах не позволить им этого сделать.
Same line of thought, NATO allies are left to deliberate Ukraine's membership to the alliance following a major European security summit in Moldova that saw Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky push for his country's ability to join the Western Defense Organization. Marwa Bel on this report.
Ukraine's bid for NATO membership will remain a problem for Moscow for years, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov commented on Friday, adding that European members of the military alliance were playing to the tune of the United States. The prospect of Ukraine's NATO membership is a contentious one, over which member states are sharply divided, with many fearing further retaliations from Moscow.
Right now, it's obviously in the middle of a war. We don't bring members in the middle of a war, but I think we can all go a long way to helping them with their short and long-term security, both through building and supplies and capabilities, but also with future agreements. And I think what we'll see is no one saying no. We'll see that path is open to Ukraine, but I also think we have to be politically real that a number of member states are cautious and
It is virtually impossible for a state to join NATO while that country is currently at war or has part of its territory occupied by a non-NATO state, given the risk that would pose to the rest of the members. In a joint briefing in Kiev with Estonian President Zelensky acknowledged joining the alliance was still the best security guarantee for Kiev.
Ми не шукаємо альтернатив.
NATO is the best security guarantee for Ukraine, full stop. But we are reasonable people and we understand that we will not pull any NATO country into a war. And that's why we understand that we won't be a member of NATO while this war is ongoing. Not because we don't want to, because it's impossible.
Це неможливо.
Zelensky has pressed for Ukrainian membership of the military alliance, but allies are divided over how fast that should happen. Western governments are wary of any move that might take the alliance closer to war with Russia.
Chinese special envoy to Eurasian affairs Li Hui said on Friday that he believes neither Ukraine nor Russia has firmly shut the door to talks. Li Hui admitted that challenges remain for relevant parties in the conflict in Ukraine to sit down for negotiating. These comments came after Li wrapped up his recent visit to Ukraine and Russia in what Beijing said it was a move to promote the peaceful and political resolutions of the conflict.
I can tell everyone that judging from the situation now, there are possibly still a lot of difficulties for all parties to sit down for negotiations and achieve outcomes. But what's important is that there has to be somebody who takes the initiative to push for the building of the broadest possible common understanding among all parties and form the greatest common divisor, and has to gradually accumulate and create conditions for the resolving of the crisis ultimately.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Friday that the United States welcomes an initiative on peace in Ukraine that will bring Russia to the negotiating table. Speaking in Helsinki, Finland, Blinken said that the United States is working with Ukraine and other allies to build consensus around the core elements of a just and lasting peace to end the war with Russia.
The United States has been working with Ukraine and allies and partners around the world to build consensus around the core elements of a just and lasting peace. To be clear, the United States welcomes any initiative that helps bring President Putin to the table to engage in meaningful diplomacy.
Fending off a U.S. default, the Senate gave final approval late Thursday to a debt ceiling and budget cuts package oppressive into the night to wrap up work on the dual-party deal and send it to President Joe Biden's desk to become law before that fast approaching deadline. The compromise package negotiated between Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy leaves neither Republicans nor Democrats fully pleased with the outcome. But the result chills the unstable debt ceiling issue that risked upsetting the U.S. and global economy until 2025 after the next presidential election.
We knew we'd need to come together for a solution like the one that passed tonight. And so I'm happy to stand here passing this critical legislation to support our families, preserve vital programs, and most importantly, avoid catastrophic default.
According to new data from United Nations Food Agency, global food products prices have hit their lowest level in over 2 years. The Food and Agriculture Organization's price index, which tracks the most traded food supplies around the world, fell to 124.3 points in May, the lowest since March 2021. And now, as a closure in our news bulletin, Newsma Algiers is preparing to meet with young Africans of Tanzania Saturday, or this night at the 5th of July Stadium in Algiers, with the intention of winning the CAF Confederation Cup. The Algerian club is one game ahead from achieving the first continental title in its history, especially after the positive result from Dar es Salaam in the first leg 2-1 in favor of the Algerians. The coach Abdel Haq Ben Sheikha and Nasruddin Nabi, or rather the coaches of Newsma Algiers and Young Africans of Tanzania respectively, held a press conference during which they talk about the readiness of their players for the CAF Cup final, which will bring them together on tonight's game.
We are ready mentally and physically. There is only one step left for us, a very small step forward to enter the history of this club. It is impossible to miss this chance.
What is really important for us now is the final game, more than anything. We are really focused on this game, and we look forward to seeing our supporters standing alongside us, as they always did. After all, they are considered player number 12 on the pitch.
We, the young Africans of Tanzania, did not play our usual performance in the first leg, in comparison to previous games. All the fans and team followers recognize this, because as we say in the Maghreb dialect, the game was bigger than us, and our players lacked the experience to handle a final game under a lot of pressure, since it was the first time they played a final game.
Wishing our best for our Algerian club, Newsma, because their win is the win of all Algerians. To this end, ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much for being with us in this late hour. For more updates, you can follow our social media platform as it is seen in the screen. And all I can say at the end, take care of yourself. Good night.